Hey everyone, it's Dr. H, your friendly wargame guide at the Air Command Staff College. I want to talk about terrain, particularly in the operational map. And this is something that a lot of people need to know. You know the terrain of the hex, of the target hex. Terrain if you're going to move, if you're going to perform supply operations. If you want to strike in an area, these are all important to know. Be able to know what terrain you're looking at here. And so there are two things to sort of point out. One, your terrain effects chart here. You can find the terrain effects chart. And we'll talk a little bit about it on the back of the main combat chart. So having that handy is useful. It's also going to be available in PDF. And then the operational map itself. So I've blown up the operational map. This is Poland to be able to talk about terrain. We're not going to go through each terrain and its effects. That's very boring. But I want to point out some important factors about terrain, some things you should probably know when it comes to doing some terrain. Let's get this over a little bit to make it a little bit better. Okay, there we go. Boom. So, when it comes to terrain exists in hexes, and it's worth noting that there is that you have terrain type, you have terrain features, and then you have to look at the hex side. Right, that you are moving, if you're moving across it from hex A to hex B, which hex edge you cross may also have terrain on it, right? So keep those three things in mind: the terrain of the hex, features of the hex, and then the hex side. These are going to be what you need to really look at to understand. And then you have the terrain effects chart, right? That allows you to read all of those things and tell you what's going on. Now, so when we talk about terrain in the hex, we mean by looking at the individual hex, what the terrain is. And that terrain is demonstrated by pictograms. So for example, right, we've got a hex here. It's got this sort of very basic cream beigeish kind of color. That is plates. That is flat. How do I know that? Well, if I come over here, right, boom, on my terrain effects chart, I can see, right, I can look for the pictogram, and then read over one spot to the left, and I'll know it's flat, right? I'll understand it's flat by looking at it, right? So then the question becomes, what are my terrain effects? Now, note, like, this is a reference for you, what the terrain effects are of that. It's also taken account for in the adjudicator and on the charts. So when you're using the adjudicator, this is already accounted for. When we talk a little bit about the charts, you'll see that these are already accounted for, but you'll know. But this is just for your own reference, right? It's sort of a one-stop shop. And then, right, we have the movement values. So remember, movement is divided into 4 categories: leg, light infantry, motorized, and mechanized. And then we have to check the weather. Is it a storm turn or is it any other turn? And then you can just read the number in here, and that's the number of movement points it costs to enter that hex. We'll talk about all of that during movement. This isn't a video about movement, that comes later, but this is about how to read it, how to read the chart, and how to read the map, right? So boom, right? Note that we've got this hex here, Balliolstock, right? You'll notice it looks like it has a city grid on it, but the background's gray, which means that it is in fact an urban hex, right? So I can look and see urban hex. Now I know, right? How much does it cost to enter an urban hex? I can go over to my terrain effects chart over here, find urban, and find all the things on it. So again, right, we can also look and see, oh look, this hex here with the trees in it, it's a woods. This darker brown color, that's rough, even darker, is we're starting to get into, what are they calling that? We're starting to get into Highland, right? And we can go up, right? Like there's even more restrictive terrain that you can see. And the big thing to do is to get used to your AOR and know what the terrain is in your AOR to a really useful degree. Okay, so that's the hex, and then we can look at hex features, right? So if we look here, right, we've got this hex. That's very clearly a woods flat hex. So I can know that and come over and look at my terrain effects chart, but there's other things going on in here, right? We've got these lines that come in. Some of them are different colors. So that means now I need to go down to terrain features, which is after the terrain in the hex. So what are the features here? Well, we've got looks like we've got this red line. That's a highway. We've got here, this is a primary road. And then we've got this gray hatched out area. That's a city, right? So how do I know that? Well, that's, again, going to be on the terrain effects chart, right? So cities are good for defense. It's going to tell me that. It's easier to move on roads. We'll talk about that when we get into roads a bit more specifically. So, right, again, we can read all this on the terrain effects chart and know what's going on. Right, here's another example of a feature, right? Hexes can have multiple features, right? We can come down here and we can see we've got a city. We've got a city with an airport in it, or correction, an air base in it, right? These are both features of that terrain. We can even have a dot. There's a town. So remember, hexes have terrain and they may have features. Hexes should have terrain hexes should have terrain, right? All hexes should have terrain. Some hexes have features. In this case, I'm pulling many hexes have features. The other thing to look at is hex side, right? We have water features, specifically rivers, move along hex sides. This makes the map not useful for navigation, for the record. Don't navigate by the next 4 maps. If you didn't know that, now you know. But the water features follow hex sides. So if you have to cross a minor river, cross through a lake, cross over a major river, that's on the map also. And you'll know, right, if I'm moving. So for example, right, if I am, let's see, if I'm moving from this hex to this hex, I have to cross over this minor river. How do I know it's a minor river? Because I know that the Vistula, which runs by Warsaw, is a major river, and it's a obviously different shape, right? So if you don't know whether you're looking at a minor river or a major river, just know what should be a major river. Go look at the major river pictogram, and you'll get what the minor river pictogram is by comparison pretty easily. So that's the basics of terrain, right? Just remember, terrain of the hex, terrain features, and water, and then hex sides. All hexes have terrain. Not all hexes have features, or do you necessarily cross something by getting to do another hex. But knowing what they are is helpful and important for understanding the hex grid in the map. And remember, all of this is depicted on the terrain effects chart. It affects movement. It can affect what's going on in the hex on other charts. So these are good to know, right? So the terrain effects chart is your friend, especially if you're going to be the JFlick or the J3, or to a certain extent the J4. Knowing a bit about that chart is going to be important. We'll talk about movement, like I said, in more detail. It's a very in-depth topic. So we'll talk about that more when the time comes. But for right now, this is just a quick video about what terrain is. Anyway, so we talked a little about terrain. That's my story for now, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.